the life you're quietly running away from. You don't feel lost because you don't know what to do. You feel lost because you know exactly what needs to change, and you keep avoiding it. Most people don't like to admit this, but adulthood is not exhausting because of responsibility. It's exhausting because of the constant internal negotiation you have with yourself. Every day, you feel the gap between who you are and who you know you could become. And instead of closing that gap, you learn how to live with it. You wake up, you follow a routine, you complete tasks, you survive the day. And on the surface, everything looks fine. You're functioning, you're responsible, you're doing what's expected of you. But inside, there's a quiet dissatisfaction you don't talk about, not because it's dramatic, but because it's persistent. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And that whisper follows you everywhere. At night, when the noise finally stops, that's when it gets louder. You think about the version of yourself you used to believe in, the one who had ideas, energy, curiosity, ambition, the one who thought life would feel more alive than this. And you don't feel angry at that version, you feel embarrassed, because you know you slowly traded that person for comfort, stability, and the approval of others. Not all at once, piece by piece. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to give up on their potential. It happens quietly. It happens when survival becomes more important than growth. When being realistic replaces being honest. When you convince yourself that this is just how life is supposed to feel. But deep down, you know that's not true. You don't feel tired because you work too hard. You feel tired because you're carrying a life that doesn't align with who you are. You're investing energy into something that doesn't give anything meaningful back. And your body knows it before your mind admits it. This is the part nobody prepares you for. The part where you're not failing, but you're also not fulfilled. The part where you're not broken, just numb. You're not unhappy enough to escape and not inspired enough to change. So you stay stuck in the middle, telling yourself you'll figure it out later. Later becomes a dangerous word. Later is how years disappear. Later is how potential quietly expires. Later is how people wake up one day realizing they spent a decade waiting for motivation instead of building discipline. And here's the truth most people avoid. Motivation was never the problem. You didn't lose motivation. You lost your tolerance for discomfort. You don't avoid change because you're lazy. You avoid it because it threatens the identity you've built to survive. The routines, the explanations, the story you tell yourself and others about why your life looks the way it does. Change would force you to admit that staying the same was a choice. That's why comfort is so dangerous. Not because it feels good, but because it feels justified. It gives you reasons to delay, reasons to wait, reasons to stay. And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to leave, because now you have something to lose. People talk about fear of failure, but that's not the real fear. The real fear is discovering that you were capable of more all along. That you didn't fail because life was unfair, but because you never fully committed. That realization hurts more than any external setback. So instead of facing that, you stay busy. You distract yourself. You scroll. You consume. You complain. You talk about how tired you are. And slowly, your standards for your own life begin to drop. You start calling survival success. You call comfort peace. You call avoidance patience. You call fear being realistic. And the worst part is, nobody stops you. Because from the outside, you look fine. This is the most dangerous phase of life. Not chaos, not crisis, but quiet dissatisfaction. Because nothing forces you to change. Nothing pushes you. Nothing breaks down enough to make action unavoidable. So you continue living a life that feels acceptable while knowing it's not the one you want. Until one day, something shifts. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just a moment of clarity that hits you unexpectedly. Maybe it's a birthday. Maybe it's seeing someone younger pass you. Maybe it's a random night where you can't sleep. And you realize something uncomfortable. Time has been moving faster than your courage. You're older than you think, not in years, but in missed chances, in postponed decisions, in conversations you avoided having with yourself. And the weight you feel isn't exhaustion. It's regret starting to form. Regret doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, disguised as reflection.
It shows up when you realize that the life you're living required far less bravery than the life you wanted. That you chose what was easier to explain over what was harder to pursue. And this is where most people make another mistake. They try to escape that feeling with motivation. They watch videos, they read quotes, they wait for inspiration to save them. But inspiration doesn't change lives. Decisions do. And decisions are uncomfortable. They require you to let go of versions of yourself that kept you safe but small. They require you to stop blaming circumstances and start taking responsibility for the direction your life is moving. Responsibility is not about guilt. It's about ownership. It's about recognizing that staying the same is not neutral. It's a direction. And every day you delay choosing differently, you reinforce that direction. You don't need a complete life overhaul. You need honesty. Brutal honesty. The kind that admits that this isn't enough anymore. That you want more not because you're ungrateful, but because you're aware. Awareness is not a flaw. It's a responsibility. The moment you become aware of what you're capable of, you become responsible for how close you get to it. And that's the part nobody can do for you. No mentor, no video, no book, no advice can replace the moment you decide to stop negotiating with yourself. To stop waiting for confidence. To stop asking for permission to take your own life seriously. Because here's the truth that separates people who change from people who stay stuck. They don't feel ready. They feel committed. Committed to being uncomfortable. Committed to looking foolish at first. Committed to showing up when motivation disappears. Committed to becoming someone they don't yet recognize. Change is not an emotional event. It's a behavioral one. And it starts quietly, with one honest decision, one uncomfortable action, one moment where you choose progress over relief. You don't need to know the entire path. You just need to stop standing still. Part 2. The invisible prison you built for yourself. At some point in life, you stop needing external pressure to stay small. You do it to yourself. Not because you're weak, but because you've learned how to survive without growing. You've built routines that protect you from discomfort. You've created explanations that sound reasonable enough to silence your own doubts. And over time, those explanations turn into beliefs. You start believing you're too late, too old, too behind, too responsible to start over. But here's what's uncomfortable to admit. Most of these beliefs were never facts. They were coping mechanisms. They were stories you told yourself to make staying the same feel acceptable. This is how the invisible prison is built. Not with bars, but with logic. Not with force, but with familiarity. You tell yourself you'll change when things slow down, when life becomes less demanding, when you have more clarity. But life doesn't slow down. It speeds up. And clarity doesn't come before action. It comes after. So you wait. And waiting slowly becomes your identity. You become the person who's always thinking about it, always planning, always almost ready. And because you're not doing nothing, you feel productive. But thinking is not moving. Planning is not building. And being busy is not the same as making progress. This is where self-betrayal begins. Not in big dramatic moments, but in small daily decisions. You betray yourself when you ignore the discomfort that's trying to guide you. When you silence that quiet voice that says, "This isn't enough anymore." When you choose short-term relief over long-term respect. Discipline is not about forcing yourself to do hard things. It's about refusing to negotiate with the version of you that wants to stay comfortable. Every time you negotiate, comfort wins. Not because it's right, but because it's familiar. You already know this. You felt it. You felt the difference between a day you honored your word to yourself and a day you didn't. The difference isn't energy, it's self-respect. When you break promises to yourself repeatedly, something inside you weakens. You stop trusting yourself. And once you don't trust yourself, motivation becomes meaningless. Why would you feel motivated by goals you no longer believe you'll pursue? This is why people say they lack discipline, when what they really lack is self-trust. Discipline isn't built through intensity. It's built through consistency, through doing small, uncomfortable things even when nobody is watching, especially when nobody is watching. But consistency is threatening because it exposes excuses. It removes the illusion that someday things will magically change. It shows you that progress is available now, but it demands effort now. And effort now feels expensive. So instead you distract yourself. You consume content. You learn endlessly without applying. You criticize the system. You compare your beginning to someone else's middle. You tell yourself that if conditions were different, you would be different. This is another lie the invisible prison feeds you. Conditions are never perfect, and they never were. The people you admire didn't start because they were confident. They became confident because they started. They didn't eliminate fear. They acted with it. The difference between them and most people isn't talent. It's tolerance. Tolerance for discomfort, tolerance for uncertainty, tolerance for looking inexperienced longer than their ego wanted to. Most adults don't fail because they aim too high. They fail because they aim too safely. They choose goals that don't challenge their identity, goals that don't require them to become someone new. But real change always requires identity death. You cannot become a new version of yourself while protecting the old one. You cannot build discipline while holding on to every habit that numbs you. You cannot claim you want more while structuring your life to avoid effort. This is the conflict that drains you. Not work, not responsibility, but contradiction. You say you want growth, but you choose comfort. You say you want freedom, but you cling to security. You say you want change, but you fear losing the identity you've used to survive. So you stay stuck between intention and action, And that space becomes heavier the longer you stay there. Here's the truth most people avoid because it removes excuses. Nobody is coming to rescue you from this. Not time, not motivation, not the right moment. If anything, time makes the prison stronger. The longer you stay, the more normal it feels. Until one day you look around and realize your life is full of things that once felt temporary. Temporary job, temporary routine, temporary compromise. All permanent now. That realization hurts, but it's also powerful. Because pain is not the enemy, numbness is. Pain still wants something different. Pain still believes in the possibility of change. And if you're feeling uncomfortable listening to this, that's not a bad sign. That's awareness returning. Awareness is dangerous to comfort, but it's essential for growth. You don't need to tear your life apart. You need to stop lying to yourself about why you stay. You need to stop calling fear practicality. Stop calling avoidance patience. Stop calling distraction rest. Rest restores you. Distraction delays you. Discipline begins the moment you stop asking how you feel and start honoring what you decided. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but consistently. One action, repeated, daily.